Seraphina Willowbrook was one of the most brilliant researchers at the Arcane Studies Institute, until betrayal shattered her world. Framed as a danger to magic itself, she's exiled to the countryside under the guise of independent research. But the truth is far crueler. Her position was stolen, her fiancé chose ambition over love, and now she's been left with nothing. Stripped of everything, Seraphina arrives at her new home, a crumbling cottage meant to humiliate her. But instead of despair, she finds freedom. No more jealous scholars, no more stolen research, just her magic, and a future she will carve with her own hands. And as she severs the last ties to her past with a spell that will burn away her engagement, she makes a vow: she will rise again. And when she does, they will all regret ever casting her aside. Witch's Love Struggle, Part 1. Chapter 1. The Decision Already Made. Seraphina Willowbrook sat at the centre of the Arcane Studies Institute's Grand Council chamber, her hands clenched in her lap. The room smelled of aged parchment and candle smoke, the scent suffocating under the weight of the stifling silence. 12 robed figures sat in a semicircle around her, their expressions unreadable as they passed a document amongst themselves. She had been called here under the pretense of discussing her latest research, but the way the council members avoided looking at her set her nerves on edge. Marcus, her fiancé, stood near the council's head, his arms folded. His presence should have been a comfort. It wasn't. Finally, Grand Magus Eldric cleared his throat and peered at her over the rim of his spectacles. Miss Willowbrook, the council has deliberated. Given the volatile nature of your research into binding spells, it has been decided that your work poses a significant risk to the integrity of the Institute. Therefore, effective immediately, you are to be reassigned to an independent study in Eldergrove, where you will continue your research in a more controlled environment. A heavy silence followed. Seraphina's heart slammed against her ribs. "You're exiling me," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. Eldric feigned a sigh. "We do not see it as exile, but as an opportunity for independent research." "Independent research?" She stood, palms bracing against the wooden table. "My work has never once failed safety inspections. My findings on magic stabilization could change the way we reinforce spellcraft, eliminating the risks of power surges entirely. And you're calling it dangerous." "You tamper with forces beyond your understanding," Councilwoman Drever cut in, lips twisting into a condescending smile. "Magic is not meant to be constrained and controlled in such a way. It is unnatural," Seraphina scoffed. "Right. And yet, the Arcane Studies Institute had no issue funding my research until now." From the corner of her eye, she caught a smirk curling on the lips of Vivian Greythorn, the daughter of High Chancellor Greythorn. Seraphina's stomach turned. Vivian. A mediocre spellcaster at best, but born into wealth and prestige. She was always bitter that Seraphina, a nobody with no prestigious lineage, could outmatch her in every discipline. Seraphina turned sharply to the council. "This isn't about my research, this is about politics, isn't it?" Her voice shook with anger. "You're clearing me out of the Institute so Vivian can take my place, even though she has no qualifications." Gasps rang through the chamber, but Vivian only tilted her head, a faux innocent smile on her lips. "Seraphina," Marcus finally spoke, his voice carefully measured. "You're being emotional. This decision isn't about Vivian." But he didn't deny it. Her breath hitched as realization settled in. This had been planned. Marcus had known. "Of course," she said, a bitter laugh escaping. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Marcus's silence told her everything. "You told me you believed in my research," she said, voice rising, "that we were in this together. But the moment politics got involved, you—" She shook her head, disgust welling in her gut. "Seraphina," Eldric warned. She turned to the council, her fury burning hot. "You're all cowards," she spat. "This isn't about safety, it's about control. You'd rather back someone incompetent but convenient over someone who actually gives a damn about magic. Enough! Eldric's voice thundered through the chamber. The decision is final. Seraphina gritted her teeth. She wanted to argue, she wanted to fight, but looking around the room at the blank, indifferent faces of the council, she realized the truth. She had already lost. She had never stood a chance. A laugh bubbled in her throat, but it was hollow. Turning on her heel, she stormed out of the chamber, not sparing Marcus or anyone else another glance. Chapter 2. Nothing left to lose. Seraphina barely registered her surroundings as she walked the stone pathways leading back to her apartment. Her anger boiled in her veins, but beneath it, a deeper wound festered. She had spent years proving herself, years proving that she was more than a low-born nobody, more than just Marcus's fiancé, more than just another research assistant, and they had tossed her aside like she was nothing. By the time she reached the steps of her apartment, the exhaustion settled in. She dug into her satchel for her keys, but before she could reach the lock, she noticed a slip of parchment tucked into the door frame. Her breath caught as she unfolded the document, a formal eviction notice. Her blood ran cold as she read the words, "By order of the Arcane Studies Institute, all properties owned and maintained by the institution shall be reclaimed immediately in accordance with your reassignment. You are to vacate the premises within 24 hours. A sick, bitter laugh escaped her lips. Of course they owned the apartment complex. Of course they wouldn't just exile her from her career. They would make sure she had nothing left. Anger and despair twisted inside her, a knot of emotions too heavy to bear. Tears burned at the edges of her vision, but she forced them back. Fine. If they wanted her gone, she would go. But she would not crawl. Chapter 3. The Road to Nowhere. Seraphina left the city before dawn, her belongings crammed into a single travel bag. She didn't look back. As she rode the transport carriage toward Eldergrove, her thoughts swirled with resentment and pain. Marcus, the council, Vivian, all of them had turned against her, and there was nothing she could do to change it. But as the landscape shifted from towering spires to rolling countryside, a thought took root in her mind. If they thought she would fade into obscurity, they were wrong. She would make something of herself, even if she had to build it from the ground up. And if the Arcane Studies Institute ever came knocking, she would make them regret ever casting her aside. Chapter 4. A Discarded Toy. The rattling of the carriage wheels came to an abrupt stop, jerking Seraphina from her bitter thoughts. The driver, a weathered old man with a disinterested gaze, barely spared her a glance as he grunted, "This is it, miss." Eldergrove, as promised. Seraphina stared out the window, her stomach twisting as she took in the sight before her. The cottage, if one could even call it that, stood at the end of a dirt path, barely holding itself together. The roof was sagging, shingles missing in odd places, and the chimney looked one strong gust of wind away from collapsing. Vines choked the stone walls, their twisted tendrils creeping over cracked windows and a door that had seen better days. The wooden porch had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole where steps should have been. It was an insult, a cruel, calculated insult. Her fingers dug into the worn fabric of her skirts as realization crashed over her. This was what the Arcane Studies Institute thought of her. One of their best researchers, cast aside and dumped in a rotting shack like some discarded relic of the past. It wasn't just exile. It was humiliation. They wanted her to suffer, to feel the weight of her fall from grace. They wanted her to crawl back to them, begging for another chance. Seraphina let out a slow, shuddering breath. They don't know me at all, do they? She could feel it, the expectation that she would break, that she would crumble beneath the weight of her exile, sulk in this abandoned shack, and admit that she was nothing without their approval. Her lips curled into a sneer. Not a chance. Squaring her shoulders, Seraphina grabbed her bag, stepped out of the carriage and marched toward the cottage. The rickety wooden porch groaned under her weight, and dust stirred as she pushed the door open with a loud creak. The scent of aged wood, dried herbs and old parchment filled the air. It was a scent she knew well. A memory surfaced, her childhood home, a modest cottage nestled on the outskirts of a small town. She remembered the warmth of the hearth, the laughter of her parents as they brewed potions late into the night, the shelves stacked with books older than any library archive. Her sneer faded. This place, as decrepit as it was not the punishment the council had hoped for. They thought they had cast her into nothingness, but they had unknowingly given her something else entirely. Freedom. No more restrictive bureaucracy. No more jealous peers whispering behind her back, trying to steal her research. No more forced smiles as Vivienne and her cronies belittled her accomplishments. Here, she could be herself. A slow smile curled her lips. Well, she murmured to herself, dropping her bag onto the dusty wooden floor. Let's get to work. The first thing Seraphina did was throw open the windows. The old glass panes rattled in protest, but fresh air rushed in, chasing away the stagnant mustiness. She rolled up her sleeves, conjured a small gust of wind, and sent layers of dust swirling out into the open. She moved through the space with purpose, her mind already making plans. The front room would be her study. She could already see the shelves lined with books, the large wooden desk against the far wall, stacked with parchment and enchanted quills. The kitchen, though small, would be perfect for her alchemical experiments. The back room, which had an arched window overlooking the forest, would be her personal sanctuary. With each sweeping motion of her hand, dirt and grime vanished. With every whispered incantation, broken furniture mended itself, scratches fading from wooden surfaces like ink disappearing from parchment. Excitement bubbled in her chest. This was hers. No prying eyes, no sabotage, no one looking over her shoulder waiting for her to fail. For the first time in years, she didn't have to hide. Magic danced at her fingertips, raw and unrestrained. She let it flow freely, breathing life back into the space. She wasn't just cleaning, she was claiming it. The Arcane Studies Institute had taken everything from her, but here, she would build something new. As she worked, a glint of silver caught her eye. She paused, frowning, and lifted her left hand. The engagement ring. For a moment, she just stared at it. The delicate silver band, the deep blue gemstone that Marcus had picked out, swearing it reminded him of her eyes. What a joke. A cold sneer twisted her lips. The ring had once been a promise, a future, a lie. Marcus had chosen his career over her. He had stood there in that council chamber and let them tear her apart. She had been loyal, and he had been spineless. Seraphina yanked the ring off and tossed it onto the nearest table with a sharp clink. Her fingers twitched as anger coiled in her gut. That wasn't enough. No, she wanted him to know, without a doubt, that there was nothing left between them. That any lingering connection, any foolish what-ifs, had burned to ash. Snatching a piece of parchment, she grabbed a quill and scrawled a single line in runic script. A spell of finality. She placed the ring in the center of the parchment, folded it carefully, and then pressed her fingertips against the surface. A soft pulse of magic surged through the page. The parchment shuddered, its edges curling inward. Then, with a flutter of wings, it shifted. A sleek black raven now sat in its place, its beady eyes gleaming with the glow of magic. The bird cawed softly, then snatched the letter in its beak and took off, vanishing through the open window. Seraphina exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Marcus would receive the message soon enough. The moment he opened the parchment, the engagement ring inside would melt into a puddle of useless silver. A fitting end. A clean break. She leaned back in her chair, watching the horizon as the sun began to set. This wasn't the future she had envisioned, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what came next. And as the stars flickered to life above her, Seraphina made a quiet vow. She would rise from this, and when she did, they would all regret ever casting her aside. And that, dear readers, brings us to the end of another magical chapter here with the Great Book Witch. If you enjoyed this bookish journey, don't forget to like this video. It helps keep the magic alive. Have thoughts, theories, or book recommendations? Drop them in the comments. I love hearing from fellow book witches. And if you want to keep turning the pages with me, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, may your bookshelves be full and your TBRs endless. Stay magical, and I'll see you in the next one.